It was supposed to be a quiet weekend at the lake. Just me, my wife, and some much-needed peace. But peace isn't something you get when Karen from the HOA lives 2 cabins over. She's the type who watches everything through her blinds, always. Has a clipboard in hand and seems to think she runs the entire shoreline. We'd had small run-ins before, nothing major. Until this time, we were unloading the truck when my wife, a calm and capable woman who served more than one tour overseas, brought out her legally owned sidearm to store inside the cabin. She always keeps it secured, always follows the rules. But the second Karen saw it, she hit the panic button literally. Within minutes, she was shouting across the property, waving her phone and yelling something about a dangerous woman with a gun. We thought it would blow over until we heard sirens. 2 sheriff deputies rolled in fast. Karen looked smug, standing there with her arms crossed like she'd just saved the neighborhood. But what happened next? She wasn't ready for that. The deputies got out, looked at my wife, and both immediately straightened up. One of them gave a respectful nod, the other a sharp, formal salute. You should have seen Karen's face, but that was just the beginning. The salute wasn't just respect, was recognition. And what the officers said next didn't just stop Karen in her tracks. It uncovered something she definitely didn't expect. Karen's jaw literally dropped when she saw those salutes. She stumbled a step back, confused, her voice suddenly quiet. One of the deputies walked right up to my wife and said, "Ma'am, it's an honor. Didn't expect to see a Silver Star recipient out here." I watched Karen's face go pale. She clearly hadn't done her homework before calling 911. My wife just nodded politely and said, "I was just putting my gear away." Calm, like always. See, what Karen didn't know, what most people don't, is that my wife isn't just some quiet woman with a cabin and a weekend off. She's a decorated combat veteran who led multiple missions overseas. She knows how to handle herself, how to handle a weapon, and more importantly, how to follow every rule in the book. That gun. It was registered, holstered, and completely legal. But none of that mattered to Karen. To her, it was just another excuse to stir up drama on this time. She picked the wrong target. The officers turned to Karen and asked her to explain what she'd actually seen. She mumbled something about feeling unsafe and aggressive behavior, but it didn't hold up. There was no threat, no confrontation, just my wife doing what she's always done, taking care of business, quietly and by the book. But things didn't end there. The deputies pulled me aside and said there'd been other calls, strange ones from this neighborhood, and Karen. She wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She'd filed complaints against 3 other families that same month. That detail about the other complaints stuck with me. After the deputies left, polite, respectful, and clearly annoyed with the wasted call, we sat on the porch and started connecting the dots. Karen wasn't just uncomfortable with us. She seemed to have a pattern. A neighbor 2 doors down, the Johnsons, mentioned they'd gotten written up by the HOA for suspicious gatherings, which turned out to be nothing more than family barbecues. Another neighbor, a quiet guy named Eric, told me Karen had reported him for excessive noise while he was literally working on his fence. At first, it seemed like she just wanted control. But the more I listened, the clearer it became she had something personal against anyone who didn't fit her vision of the perfect lake community. She had influence on the HOA board and had gotten real cozy with some of the decision makers. And now that we'd seen how quickly she called law enforcement, it was clear she wasn't just complaining, she was escalating. What made it worse was the tone in those complaints. Words like threatening, intimidating, and aggressive behavior kept popping up. That's when my wife raised a good point. This wasn't just about us. Karen was building a paper trail. She was documenting people, collecting HOA violations, and trying to create a record that made others look like problems even when they weren't. We had to figure out what she was planning, because if she'd already dragged law enforcement into a peaceful weekend, who knew what she'd try next? That night, I couldn't sleep. Neither could my wife. We sat inside, lights low, listening to the crickets and the occasional sound of lake water brushing the dock. Every car that passed made us glance toward the road. It wasn't fear, it was that gut feeling that something else was coming. And we were right. Early the next morning, we found another HOA violation notice taped to our cabin door. This one was different. It wasn't about noise or yard maintenance. It accused us of brandishing a weapon in a community setting and referenced HOA bylaw sections we'd never even heard of. The problem, we'd never pointed or threatened anyone. The gun had never left my wife's side or its holster. It was a complete exaggeration. We looked closer at the fine print. The notice claimed a board vote had already taken place and our behavior was under review. No hearing, no warning. Just a threat of penalties, even possible removal from the HOA. That's when we knew this wasn't just Karen acting alone. Someone, maybe a small group, was trying to use HOA power to push us out. It didn't matter that we were veterans, homeowners, respectful neighbors. To them, we didn't fit. I reached out to Eric and the Johnsons again. They'd gotten similar notices, all worded the same way. Karen's fingerprints were all over it. And now, it looked like the next HOA meeting would be more than just a gathering. It might be the showdown that decided whether we got to stay. A few days before the HOA meeting, we got a tip completely unexpected. Mel, a part-time resident, who rarely spoke up, pulled me aside during a morning walk. She looked around first, then handed me a folded piece of paper. "You didn't get this from me," she whispered. Inside were printed screenshot emails between Karen and two other HOA board members. The subject lines alone told the story. Push them out quietly, document everything, and most disturbing of all, let's make an example. The emails went deeper than just notes about us. They outlined a strategy to target non-compliant homeowners' coded language for anyone who didn't match Karen's vision of the lake community. It wasn't about rules, it was about control. Selective enforcement, false complaints, even manipulating meeting minutes to make decisions look unanimous. And this wasn't new. It had been going on for months. We realized the upcoming HOA meeting wasn't just a vote on our violation, it was part of a bigger plan. If they succeeded, it would give Karen and her circle even more power to go after others. We knew we had to act fast. My wife contacted a former JAG attorney she'd served with, who immediately saw the potential legal issues. Meanwhile, I started printing copies of everything: mails, violation notices, eyewitness accounts. But the biggest surprise came the night before the meeting when we found a letter in our mailbox. It was anonymous, handwritten, and said, Karen's hiding something about the land. Dig deeper, that changed everything. The day of the HOA meeting, the room was packed, more neighbors than I'd ever seen show up. Word had spread fast, especially after Eric and the Johnsons quietly shared copies of those leaked emails. Karen sat at the front table looking calm, even smug, like everything was still under control. She opened the meeting with her usual tight smile and started reading off the agenda. But before she could get far, I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I just laid it all out: how the complaint against my wife was exaggerated, how other families had been targeted, and how we now had proof of coordinated bias from within the board. Then I dropped the twist: the letter about the land. A few of us had dug through county records and found something interesting. Karen had been quietly petitioning for land reclassification around her property and to others. If passed, it would have increased her lot value by tens of thousands while placing restrictions on others. That's why she wanted control. The room went quiet. Karen tried to deny it, but my wife pulled out a printed map and the pending application. It had her name and signature right there. A few board members turned visibly pale. Then came the final moment, the deputy who saluted my wife earlier. He stepped forward from the back of the room, off duty, and said, "This ends tonight." And just when we thought it was over, Karen stood up and said, "You think I'm the only one?" When Karen said those words, "You think I'm the only one?" the whole room shifted. People started whispering, glancing at the rest of the board. A few looked down, avoiding eye contact. But by then, the truth was already out. The documents, the land scheme, the targeted violations, it was all on record. The meeting ended with a unanimous vote to suspend Karen and the other 2 board members involved pending an investigation. That same night, several neighbors came up to us, shaking our hands, apologizing for staying silent, thanking us for standing up. It wasn't just about our cabin anymore. It was about the entire community. Over the next few weeks, things started to change. The HOA brought in a neutral third party to review policies. The ridiculous violations were dropped. My wife and I were officially cleared of any wrongdoing. As for Karen, her land reclassification request was denied, and she quietly listed her place for sale. No more yelling across the yard, no more fake complaints. Just quiet for the first time in a long while.